Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
We're doing quite well.
Yes.
And I hope to bring about a little bit of good news today. At least we keep our fingers crossed when we hear something that is helpful. But what we're going to be talking about in a minute is the breakthrough where it's confirmation about all the shenanigans that went on about the gassing at Douma a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And there's evidence now that has come out in some of the reports. But before we get into that, I wanted to mention, just the whole policy there, which is not so optimistic. Is, our U.S. troops were confronted by the Russians just within the last couple of days, because after we essentially lost Syria and Assad remains and things are better there, Trump decided it's our oil. We're going to keep our oil. We're going to take it, and we have military forces there. But there were Russians moving in that direction to confront. And the story is that the Russians were moving. Yes, they're not about to open up, gunfire now against the Americans.
No.
But they wanted it to be known that they're not going to go away quietly and just concede, Trump wants the oil. We'll give him the oil. That'll help pay our bills. We're running up a big deficit. That's not going to happen. But, of course, the Russian argument is that the oil really belongs to Syria. And I think Russia comes down on a stronger position by saying, we've been invited here, we act as an ally, and we want to preserve the oil for the Syrians, and that is their argument. So it's something that I think is still there. There's still going to be a problem, and we don't know how that will resolve. But we wanted to also, bring up the subject of what's going on at the United Nations.
Yeah.
Just 2 days ago, on Monday, there was a hearing. The United Nations had a meeting, and it had to do with what happened back in 2018, and that is the so-called Assad's gassing his own people, and we retaliate. And then there was a report, and it was found that the report was changed at the last minute, and the most reliable investigator ended up losing his job over it because he recognized and said, this isn't what we said. We did the report, and they fudged it. Fake news type of thing. But I figure, well, it'll die there. Most people haven't even been thinking about this anymore. But when you look at it, it's pretty darn significant of all the propaganda, and our hands aren't clean. We've been involved in this, and the report was mainly to perpetuate the anti-Assad, anti-Russia agenda to keep the people stirred up. And if Trump wants to do that, the Democrats love it. They probably, despise the Russians more than any of the Republicans do.
Yeah.
But it's a consensus that Russia is the target. We have to have an enemy, and we've been working on this. But it is a little bit helpful that the report yesterday with Ian Henderson, who was the investigator, came out and revealed this, although he didn't get to testify easily, did he? He had to work at it, and that goes to show how many powerful figures in this country operated to try to keep him from saying anything, because it's such a shame when everybody talks about truth and fake news and all this, and then the effort's gone to hide the truth about this, and it isn't some conspiracy of foreign nations.
Yeah.
It's our government that has participated, and that's pretty discouraging.
It is, and you refer to the difficulty he had. So he was invited under a special process by the UN Security Council. The invitation was initiated by the Chinese with sponsorship from the Russians to have Ian Henderson, he spent 12 years, he's an engineer, he's a trained scientist, he spent 12 years as an inspector with the OPCW, Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, a UN agency, which, by the way, is funded to a large degree by the U.S. government. He was invited to come on Monday, the 20th, to give a presentation about what really had happened with these reports. Well, he was denied a visa waiver, so he wasn't even allowed to come to the U.S., and so he had to submit his report by video and in writing. But he was the team leader, and here's just a quick rundown of the timeline. Remember the attack in April of 2018 in Douma. At the time, the city was under control of jihadists. It was about to fall. It was about to be liberated by Assad. Boom, there's a quote-unquote chemical attack. The white helmets just happened to be there with their cameras rolling to show all these people foaming at the mouth and how horrible Assad was. And so then a couple of days later, Trump says, okay, I'm going to throw some missiles over there. The inspector team hadn't even arrived. There was no evidence of anything other than the video made by the white helmets, which are partly funded by the U.S. government. So he threw some missiles in there. The OPCW team came in to investigate. A team of scientists came in to investigate. They had an interim report that was not made public in July of 2018 in which they determined that there's no evidence of chemical use in Douma. There was no evidence of the attack. So what happened when this interim report happened? Well, the OPCW bigwigs, the big shots, they took the whole team in that had been on the ground and fired them all, kicked them all out. They brought in a new team that had never even been in the country. And then when the final report came out in March of 2019, the conclusion was completely the opposite. There was a gas attack, Assad did it, here were the canisters, here's what happened. And the old team that was on the ground said, what is going on here? This is the opposite of what we found.
You know, if there is such a thing as an honest international bureaucrat, I think that Ian Henderson probably represents this. The way I read what he had to say and what he was doing is that he wanted the OPCW to do a good job.
Yeah.
And this were ruining it. It was ruining their reputation, and he believed he was serving mankind, I'm sure, if they sort these things out and quit having false accusations. And when they're true accusations, then they can depend on this to use force if they need to. But here, they lied about the evidence, and they used force anyway. They used the force about lying. So I sensed, I don't know if you sensed the same thing, that he probably was annoyed at discrediting an organization that he's worked with 12 years. And we haven't heard any complaints about him any other time that I know of.
Well, remember Scott Ritter was the chief UN weapons inspector in Iraq. How did they destroy him?
Yeah.
But the other thing that happened, and this came out, now here's more of the timeline, because you had these things happen, but then back in November, you remember, because we did a show on this, WikiLeaks released all of the internal memos in the OPCW showing what they really found on the ground, a number of things. The final report never listed the chlorine levels. They said it was chlorine gas. And what the inspectors that were on the ground said, they were parts per billion, like you'd have just under your kitchen sink. The sickness was not consistent with chlorine poisoning, the kinds of things that the white helmets were videotaping. The frothing at the mouth is not what you get with that. And also that the cylinders could not have been dropped by a plane. And this was he's a ballistics expert, that was his conclusion. So these were the internal memos that were released back in November. And also there was another whistleblower from the team who spoke to Jonathan Steele, the journalist, where he talked about how when this team was first assembled, they were brought into a room with 3 unnamed U.S. government officials, probably a 3-letter agency, and they were told, here's what you're going to conclude. Assad did it. He gassed his own people. That's what your report better say. And so there's a lot of evidence that the U.S. had a lot of how many years of policy dependent on this being true.
Yeah. And the evidence is very clear that we did what we had to do to make him adapt that report and change that report. And now it comes along, and this is add insult to injury, when he wants to come to our country and present the case. They make a mockery of the whole course because we're not letting you in our country. They won't even give him a visa to go to the United Nations. Well, what's the purpose, of having these organizations if we take charge like this? And yet the whole thing is I don't think we're going to hear much about this in the media at all. I don't think it's going to come up in the impeachment hearings. Somebody should say, hey, look, if you're looking for somebody to do and maybe have some serious infractions on our national security and what we're doing, we ought to talk about these kind of things that are happening. And it's It's really disgusting that people who brag about the Constitution and seeking truth participate in this. And this isn't just one party. You know, in certain things, especially when it comes to Russia, it's pretty bipartisan. You know, no, there's not very many standing up for Russia. And I think Tulsi's probably one that's more objective about this anything. And look how much trouble she gets into it for it.
In fact, you hit the nail on the head, because this is exactly what happened. Anyone questioning this insane series of events where the guys on the ground, the guys and gals on the ground, here's what we found with our, you know, we're scientists, here's what we found, and then the final report says the opposite. Anyone questioning that, the narrative now is saying that they're Russian agents. They're all doing the bidding of Russia for questioning this. The U.S. mainstream media hasn't said a word about this. The only media outlet that said anything is a group called Bellingcat, you know, and this is run by this guy, Elliot Higgins, and they're viewed as the great, wonderful experts. They question this. They don't believe this. They know that Assad gassed his own people. Well, it turns out Bellingcat is funded by the U.S. government, right? This is an independent investigative arm. And here's the thing. Elliot Higgins used to work for the Atlantic Council, you know, the pro-war think tank. And here's the other thing, and I just have to read this if you don't mind, Dr. Paul. Elliot Higgins, the great expert who said that Ian Henderson is full of beans. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Here's an engineer. Theodore Postroll, who's a chemist who also backed Henderson's claims, is stupid. They don't know anything. And here's Higgins, the great expert. Here's what the New York Times said about him. Higgins attributed his skill not to any special knowledge of international conflicts or digital data, but to the hours he had spent playing video games, which, he said, gave him the idea that any mystery can be cracked. Here's a guy who sits on his couch playing video games, and he's smarter than all the inspectors who are literally there taking samples.
You know, it's commonplace, common that they'll lie to get the people to support going into the wars. But then when it goes badly, then there's more lies told to perpetuate the war. And I just think how many lies have been told about getting us into the wars in the Middle East and Vietnam and also, you know, and it's never one party. It's always the continuous thing. But I've made the assumption that change in policy or changing administrations really is irrelevant, because the executive power, the real president, is represented by, you know, this clique of people in the deep state. So that's why the policies continue. They come and go. I mean, Cheney's no longer president. Oh, well, no, he wasn't president. He's no longer around, but there are people, you know, doing the same thing. But they have to keep telling the lies, and it's something that, unfortunately, it's very difficult to get this message out. So I hope we achieve something by calling some attention to this, and you've done a lot of hard work on this with the organization.
Well, you know, the sinister force behind a lot of this is someone we both know, and that's John Bolton. He was involved at the time with this, and by the way, he was involved, and we talked about this on the show, he was involved in a previous effort to pressure the OPCW. And remember, this was back in 2002, where the OPCW inspectors, they came to an agreement with Iraq. Okay, you can come in, remember at the last minute, you can come in, you can have unannounced inspections, and this is when Scott Ritter was part of it. You know, we give up, you could come in and have these inspections. This is, at the time, it was the head of the OPCW was a fellow called Bustani. And so he negotiates this great deal. Okay, we can avoid war. We can go in and we can inspect at any time. Bolton came over to him and said, quote, Cheney wants you out. And then he threatened him saying, quote, you have 24 hours to leave the organization, and if you don't comply with this decision by Washington, we have ways to retaliate against you. We know where your kids live.
Yeah, that's more powerful than the effort made by the whistleblower, a true, honest whistleblower who wants to reveal what's going on. They too often end up in jail. They're never made heroes. That's the last thing that'll ever happen if somebody comes along and really tells the truth, which they have, and we know they've been our friends and we've worked with them. Too many of them end up, put in prison, at least, or lost their reputation, and all these things. So, and it's all a pretense. It's just such a shame that fake news is universal. It's contagious. And even if they don't have fake news when they go to Washington, they learn how to do it real fast because somebody else is controlling the scenario. It's not these individuals. I often said, being in Washington, the one thing that is very clear to me was that the members of Congress are totally inept. They have no clout. They have nothing. They're just sort of players in chess that people move them around. They really don't make decisions. I think that about this impeachment thing going on. They're not talking about anything serious, but it's enough to create the appearance of really deep discussion. About foreign policy. Should we or should we not? We don't want these isolationists to be in charge. They're evil people. But we can be friends with, Mohammed bin Salman because and think he's a great friend. I mean, if anybody looked at his record, if they were looking around for a Hitler to destroy, I imagine he has some authoritarian imperfections.
Yeah, that's no kidding. Here's the thing, Dr. Paul. The media loves scandal. We know that. They love to report on scandal. Why is there zero interest in this OPCW story? It's a huge scandal waiting to drop in their lap. And I think the answer is because we don't have an independent media in the U.S. They're the lapdog of the state. They will never challenge the official line of the U.S. government. I don't care if you're left or right, if you're Rachel or if you're Fox. It doesn't matter. And that's what's sad. And that's why I say you won't find this kind of analysis and reporting anywhere else in the mainstream media. And we'll be demonized as Russian agents and Assad apologists and everything for daring to challenge the dominant paradigm. The fact of the matter is we are the true independent media. And you know why we're independent? It's because we're funded by you. We're funded by your donations. We're funded by your tax-deductible donations to the Ron Paul Institute. So we answer to you rather than to someone else, to some corporate overlord. So I would ask you to please keep supporting us, and we appreciate it. Our website is ronpaulinstitute.org, but also subscribe to the Liberty Report and hit the notifications so you'll know when we go live. Your subscription button is just there underneath where you're watching us, so you can subscribe and have your friends and family and relatives subscribe as well, so we can push this information out and really keep exposing the truth. And we thank you for watching us.
Very good. I want to point out one more inconsistency or bit of hypocrisy with our policy, and that has to do with Iran, which is, in this same group of Syria and the Russians, all in the antagonism that exists. But, shortly after Trump became president, he says, the non-proliferation treaty, that's bad. It's bad for us. We got to get out. And so he leaves, which is, since I'm not gung-ho on international treaties anyway, I say, well, that's okay, but what's going to happen to the policy? But what happens is that we leave, we reject it, we literally undermine it, so that we can move that all in our direction. At the same time now, when Iran tends to do anything that might, suffice to help them in their national defense, we come down and condemn them. And if the Europeans don't go along, if they don't go along with us, we'll put on sanctions. So the Europeans are coerced into it. But the hypocrisy of us, we really undermine the whole thing. And now we're saying, boy, Iranians, this will just be another excuse for us to deal with you. And that is the kind of thing that isn't very healthy. I think it's a shame that we can't keep people who are really talking about the truth. We might not stick to it, but it's you turn the TV on and that's what you hear. You hear the canned news, and you hear all the justifications and the fake stuff going on. Hopefully this little report today about what's going on with the OPCW and the report will reveal, what's really going on, and long term and specifically, this is used by us to justify a non-interventionist foreign policy. And people will say, "Oh no, you guys are a bunch of isolationists. You don't want to deal with it. You don't want to deal with the world." Well, no, it's different than that, and that's why we work hard at this to try to get this message, and making sure people understand that this is a policy of not isolationism. It's a policy of getting along with people, using diplomacy, using trade, and using common decency, and quit looking for war profits and quit pretending that we are the king of the world. That is what we want. I think it's a very American, at least at one time it was thought to be pro-American to do that. It certainly is pro-peace. And I thank you for joining us so often with these programs, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon.